I think there may have been a massive piece of money laundering committed by a major government which ought to know better. My lords, it starts in April and May of 2009. A total of $15 trillion is alleged to have been passed into the hands of HSBC for onward transit to the Royal Bank of Scotland. And we need to look to where this came from and what the history of this money is. I would have thought establishing whether this is a correct piece of paper or not is just 2 phone calls away, one to Mr. Geithner and one to Mr. Greenspan, both of whom still prosper and live, so they could easily confirm whether they signed this. Each of the 5 trillion payments that came in has been acknowledged and receipted by the senior executives of HSBC and again receipted by the executives of the Royal Bank of Scotland. And I have a set of the whole of those receipts for all of this money. Why would any bank want to sign £5 trillion worth, $5 trillion worth, 15 trillion in total, of receipts if the money didn't exist? So soon looked at it and said immediately, this is rubbish, it's far too much money, it would stick out like a sore thumb and you can't see it in the Royal Bank of Scotland accounts. Quite right. Secondly, he said, the gold backing it is ridiculous. There's only been 1,507 tons of gold mined in the history of the world, so you can't have 750,000 tons. This is true. And the third thing he said obviously was, it's a scam. And I agree with him, it was a scam.
Britain's financial regulator has fined HSBC a record €12.25 million for mis-selling investment plans to elderly customers.
It's Europe's biggest bank, so perhaps HSBC can afford £3.2 million, but it still won't be happy to have to pay the fine or face the embarrassment of losing the confidential data of 180,000 of its customers.
One of the 10 biggest banks operating in America, the British bank SSBC, was under fire for using their bank to enable drug lords, even suspected terrorists.
We deeply regret and apologise for the fact that HSBC did not live up to our own expectations, the expectations of our regulators, our customers, our employees and the general public.
HSBC was called to appear before a Senate committee after it was revealed the bank helped launder billions of dollars through its global operations. A year-long investigation found HSBC essentially acted as banker to some of the world's most dangerous people.
It's an astonishing case. There is complete criminality on the part of the bank. They have violated so many different laws in so many different categories for so long. That it's absolutely astonishing.
The Vatican Bank is facing a possible money laundering scandal after it emerged JP Morgan was closing one of its accounts due to a lack of information about the source of deposits, Italian newspapers report.
Abbas Gokul was back in prison tonight after being convicted of the biggest fraud in banking history. The 61-year-old, who was legally aided, masterminded a fraud totalling £750 million.
The UK's Financial Services Authority said that it has fined Barclays £7.7 million for failing to give retail customers suitable advice about investing in 2 funds the bank sold. The bank will also have to pay up to £60 million in compensation to customers who received the wrong advice.
Capital One, it will pay $210 million to settle a government probe that it used deceptive marketing tactics.
Will pay $285 million to settle a civil fraud case. Citi is accused of misleading customers who invested in complex mortgage securities.
Shares of Deutsche Bank are higher after the bank admitted to criminal wrongdoing for its role in fraudulent tax shelters. Reuters reported the bank agreed to pay $553.6 million to settle the case. Deutsche Bank reportedly said it has already set aside money to cover the fine. Profits won't be affected by the settlement.
Financial Industry Regulatory Authority has fined Morgan Stanley $800,000 Tuesday over failure to adequately disclose conflicts of interest in notes covering analyst research.
Secretary Timothy Geithner appeared before Congress Wednesday to answer questions surrounding his initial response to the rigging of the international interest rate, LIBOR. The banking giant Barclays was fined $453 million last month for manipulating LIBOR, which provides the basis for rates on trillions of dollars in transactions across the globe.
Thursday, Goldman Sachs agreed to pay $550 million to resolve a civil fraud lawsuit over selling a mortgage investment that was established.
On Wednesday, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, an independent agency of the US government, ruled that JP Morgan used money belonging to clients of Lehman Brothers as though it was JP Morgan's own money. JP Morgan overextended Lehman Brothers' credit and loaned against it, which some economists say contributed to Lehman Brothers' downfall. But instead of a prolonged court case which could generate negative publicity, JP Morgan has settled the dispute. The world's largest bank has agreed to a civil fine of $20 million.
JP Morgan Chase has been fined $2 million by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency in regards to the marketing of credit protection products sold through the bank's auto, home lending, and car services divisions between January 2008 and May 2009.
The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority has fined Bank of America's Merrill Lynch $500,000 on Wednesday for failing to give sales charge discounts to customers on unit investment trust purchases that were eligible, reports MarketWatch. Merrill Lynch officials had reportedly agreed to give over $2 million to affected clients.
The Royal Bank of Scotland is in the news again today as they announced they have put aside £125 million to pay compensation to customers affected by the recent two-week computer breakdown.
The former chief of Germany's corporate finance bank, IKB, has been found guilty of market manipulation.
UBS is paying a $160 million fine over alleged anti-competitive activities conducted from 2001 to 2006 in the municipal bond investments market. As part of the agreement with the Justice Department, UBS admits, acknowledges, and accepts responsibility for illegal anti-competitive conduct by its former employees.
The Federal Reserve secretly gave nearly $8 trillion, that's T for trillion dollars, to American and international banks during the 2008 bailout, according to Bloomberg News. The banks made an estimated $13 billion in profits through this scheme. Did Congress have a clue? 9 of the largest banks that received the secret Fed bailouts paid nearly 5,000 of their employees $1 million or more in bonuses. Question: where did the Fed get most of the $7.7 trillion? Answer: they created it out of nothing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Inspector Coleman, you're the Inspector General for the Federal Reserve, right? Okay.
That's correct.
Have you done any investigations concerning the Federal Reserve's role in deciding not to save Lehman Brothers, which led to shockwaves that went through the entire financial system?
In that particular area, I don't generally comment on specific investigations, but we do not currently have an investigation in that particular area.
Well, I understand that, but we're talking about events that started unfolding 8 months ago. Have you reached any conclusions about the Fed expanding its balance sheet by over $1 trillion since last September?
We have not yet reached any conclusions.
What have you done to investigate the off-balance sheet transactions conducted by the Federal Reserve, which, according to Bloomberg, now total $9 trillion in the last 8 months?
At this point, we're conducting our lending facility project at a fairly high level and have not gotten to a specific level of detail to really be in a position to respond to your question.
Have you conducted any investigation or auditing of the losses that the Federal Reserve has experienced on its lending since last September?
We're still in the process of conducting that review. Until we actually, go out and gather the information, I'm not in a position to really respond to the specific question.
So are you telling me that nobody at the Federal Reserve is keeping track on a regular basis of the losses that it incurs on what is now a $2 trillion portfolio?
I don't know if you're telling me that you're mentioning that there's losses. I'm just saying that we're not, until we actually look at the program and have the information, we are not in a position to say whether there are losses or to respond in any other way to that particular.
Mr. Chairman, my time is up, but I have to tell you honestly, I am shocked to find out that nobody at the Federal Reserve, including the Inspector General, is keeping track of this.
The biggest banks in France and Germany and a preeminent US hedge fund have been named in one of the biggest insider trading scandals ever unearthed in London's business community. An executive of Deutsche Bank, senior executive at BNP Paribas, and a member of the £10 billion sterling More Capital hedge fund were 3 of 6 financiers taken into custody. The arrest represents one of the biggest operations ever carried out by the Financial Services Authority in the UK as part of its escalating drive to root out insider dealing in Britain's financial community. A team of 143 FSA officers, in conjunction with a squad from the Serious Organised Crime Agency, carried out early morning raids at 16 addresses in southeast England. Computers and documents were seized in the raid from the homes and businesses of those targeted. The FSA said the financiers were suspected of being involved in a sophisticated and long-running insider dealing ring.
Elizabeth Magner is a federal bankruptcy judge in the Eastern District of Louisiana, and she just bitch-slapped Wells Fargo. She asked for over 400 cases where they were doing mortgages and saying, oh, foreclosing on houses, and saying, oh my God, these guys didn't pay their bills, hurry up and give us the houses and throw them out. And she looked at 20 in specific and found out that there were mistakes in every single case.
Last week we had the largest mortgage settlement or mortgage suit settlement in the history of homeownership in the United States. $25 billion between Bank of America, Chase, Wells Fargo, Ally Financial, and Citigroup. It will go up by another $4 billion if there's another 9 small banks that join in this settlement.
Well, it turns out that they funneled a lot of drug money through Wachovia. Now, Wachovia says, oh, how could we have known? You're telling me all that money coming out of Mexico was from drugs? Golly gee willikers, we just couldn't manage to investigate any of it. You're saying it was also cash used to buy 4 planes that shipped a total of 22 tons of cocaine, among other things? How were we to know? So the government actually pressed them on this a little bit, and the case was later settled for $110 million, and then they added $50 million in fines on top because it was absolutely clear that Wachovia did know and they didn't give it to
Wednesday, the Federal Reserve hit Wells Fargo with an $85 million fine for supposedly steering borrowers into high-cost subprime mortgage loans, even if they were qualified for safer loans.
Have you ever wondered why Canada is in debt? Have you ever wondered why the government forces Canadians to pay so many taxes? Have you ever wondered why the bankers from the largest private banks are becoming wealthier and the rest of us are not? Have you ever wondered why the gross national debt is over $800 billion? Or why we are spending $160 million a day on the interest of the national debt? That's $60 billion a year. Have you ever wondered who receives the $60 billion? What I have discovered is the banks and the government have colluded to financially enslave the people of Canada. I will share with you 3 important points of reference, which will hopefully spark enough interest and concern for you to continue the research on your own and to engage your government to stop this criminal act against the people of Canada. First, we will briefly examine the Bank of Canada. Second, we will see how our banking system works today. And lastly, I will offer a viable solution that we can petition our government to implement. A very little known figure in Canadian history is J.O. Gradden McGeer. He was a lawyer, member of Parliament, and mayor of Vancouver. His contribution to Canada is probably the greatest in our history. He championed the creation of the National Bank of Canada, whose sole purpose is to create and manage Canada's money. It was formed on July 3, 1934, and owned by all Canadians. Until the 1970s, because of the Bank of Canada, Canada's national debt was held at a constant, manageable level, until the government decided to implement what we now have as our modern-day banking system that is robbing the Canadian people. So how are they robbing us? Money being used to pad the pockets of the banks. Also, the government gave the banks the ability to loan out money that doesn't exist in the form of loans. When a bank gives you a mortgage, which literally means a death pledge, or a loan, they don't actually give you money. They click a key on a computer and generate the fake money out of thin air. They don't actually have it in their bank vaults. Presently, the banks only have $4 billion on reserve, but they have loaned out over $1.5 trillion. To quote Graham Towers, each and every time a bank makes a loan, a new bank credit is created. New deposits, brand new money. Broadly speaking, all new money comes out of a bank in the form of loans. As loans are debt, then under the present system, all money is debt.